Hello and welcome to the studio. Today I'd like to talk to you about these camber adjusters, offer a few words of warning about using them, and give you a few tips on how to make them work best and last as long as possible. So here we go. If you own a car with double A-arm suspension or multi-link suspension, aka most older Hondas, you've probably seen these camber adjusters and camber correctors for sale somewhere. These replace the inner pivots of your upper control arms and give you the ability to adjust camber by sliding the inner pivots of your upper control arms along this track here, and then by tightening this bolt down to where you want it to be. They're sold by many companies under various brand names, and they all roughly look the same, and technically they all do the same thing. However, these do have a little bit of a bad reputation due to a few common problems. The first is that the threads on the bolts up here and down here, they do tend to strip. Sometimes it's from over-tightening, and sometimes it's actually from hard use. The second problem is that they do tend to develop play over time. This one here isn't too bad, but this one, which came off our StudioVRM Prelude race car, is absolutely atrocious. Look at that. You can hear that. By the way, this was what was causing our race car to weave uncontrollably down the straights the last time we were out on track. Take a look at this clip. See the car swaying back and forth here? That's not me sawing at the steering wheel. That's this camber adjuster allowing the wheel to move back and forth uncontrollably. The third problem is that the bodies themselves can break, especially on the cheaper ones. This is not the most common thing, but it's not unheard of. I got this photo from fellow Honda Prelude racer and Champ Car team owner Shull of CMP Racing. He had not one, but two of these camber adjusters snap in half on him during an 8-hour endurance race with no warning whatsoever. It's pretty scary stuff. The good news is that these are all problems that you can either prevent or solve one way or another. The first thing is, the obvious, look at what brand you're buying. Even though a lot of these look identical in the photos, there are some subtle but very important differences in the materials and the castings that they use. This cheaper Ultra Power anchor, for example, uses a softer metal in the threads here and a very porous sand-cast steel from the body. It is hard to tell from the outside just looking at these guys, but it's very easy to tell from the price tag. These cheaper units are always between $17 to $25 per pair, while the more expensive units, like this Moog unit, is somewhere between $45 and $70 per pair. And as far as brands go, you want to look for names like Engel, Dorman, Moog, aka Moog, aka Moog, however you'd like to pronounce it. The second thing is that there are some tricks that you can do to make these last longer. There are two types of camber adjusters out there. There's this one with the rubber bushing in here, and there's this one with polyurethane bushing in the core here. The way these rubber bushing ones work is that you bolt this down to the suspension, and when the arm articulates up and down, it twists this little rubber sleeve that's in here. Because the rubber inside is being twisted rather than rotated, these don't have a whole lot of travel, and they do tend to wear out faster if you twist them too far. So if you have these, make sure that the pivots are slightly angled inwards on the control arm when you install them and bolt them into your car. This will remove any excessive preload that's on these bushings, and that will help them from developing any unnecessary play. These polyurethane bushing units are a little bit more like your standard poly suspension bushings. Now, if you have these, I would recommend that you treat them the same way. First, push out this little metal bushing that's on the inside here. And as you see, they don't come with any sort of grease from the factory. So I would recommend wrapping this in a single layer of Teflon tape, grease it up with a PTFE or a silicone-based grease like a Super Lube, and then press this back in. It's very quick, it's very easy, and this, believe it or not, will help the bushing rotate more freely, and it will last a lot longer before it starts developing any sort of play. The third thing to remember is that you can't mix and match these guys. There are two pivots on each control arm, And both of these pivots either have to be the rubber type or the polyurethane type. Don't mix them. Bad things will happen. The polyurethane arm ones always rotate more freely and have more travel than the rubber ones, and basically what will happen is that one of these two will be stressed further when the suspension moves, and that one will wear out faster. So, if you have to replace one of these, always replace both pivots on the arm at the same time. Now, what can you do if your camber adjusters have already started developing play? If your camber adjusters have started to show cracks, have stripped threads, or have a substantial amount of play like this one, your best bet may be to throw them out and get new ones. If your adjusters are relatively healthy still and they only have a little bit of play, you can extend the life of the unit with a little bit of welding. All of these camber adjusters develop play because of this little captive bolt in here. What happens here is that this bolt is just held in place by the surrounding housing here, and over time the bolt moving back and forth gouges the housing out and it lets it do stuff like this. What you can do is, especially with these polyurethane units, you can actually take them apart and you can put a little bead of weld right between the bolt and the housing there and just secure it in place. Here's one where I've already done that. And as you can see, these are definitely not the prettiest welds. I just did this to my Harbor Freight flux core welder very quickly in about 5 minutes just to show you what could be done. But this takes very little skill and very little in terms of equipment. And once you have this in place, there is absolutely no play at all. Now, all that said, don't let this scare you from using this type of camber adjuster. They're often a good, practical option for fixing small issues with your alignment, and the decent ones are good enough to be used in autocross, track, and race applications. Just make sure you check them every so often to make sure that they haven't worn out prematurely, and you'll be good to go for a very long time. But for those of you who decide that you'd like to have something that's a little easier to maintain, there are other options. For Hondas, especially in the rear suspension, you have adjustable control arms and these adjustable ball joints that slide back and forth here. Now, these do take up a little bit of suspension travel and they need to be periodically checked as well. But they tend to last a little longer, and it's easier to tell when they wear out because they're right there on the outside of the wheel when you take the wheel off. And if you're the handy type, you can also just slot the holes in the control arms like Ross did on his car instead of using these adjustable camber adjusters. You will need to find a way to tighten down the pivots once you get them to where you want. My recommendation is to use either these external tooth lock washers or these Nordlock type locking washers. But if you are okay with a more permanent solution, you could just get it to where you want and just weld a flat washer in place and just make that the new pivot hole. In any case, that's all I have for you today. Thank you very much for watching. I will see you at the track. Script on the floor, hold on.